The narcissist took out a spiritual loan to fund a campaign against someone who was already becoming untouchable. The interest rate was karma. They didn't read the terms. Let's establish something that the narcissist will never say out loud, and that you need to hear clearly. They are afraid of you, not the version of you they constructed in the smear campaign, not the diminished, destabilized, isolated version they worked so hard to manufacture, not the you that doubted everything and apologized for existing. The real you, the one that kept surviving, the one that kept returning to itself no matter how many times they tried to redirect it. The one that, even in the deepest confusion of the cycle, kept asking questions they couldn't afford for you to ask. That version of you activated something in them that their entire architecture is designed to suppress and conceal: fear. And here is the thing about narcissistic fear that makes it uniquely destructive to them. They cannot acknowledge it. They cannot process it. They cannot sit with it long enough to integrate or release it. So instead, they do the only thing their system knows how to do with an emotion that threatens the false self. They convert it into a campaign. Every act of sabotage was fear in a costume. Every manipulation was terror with a strategy attached. Every attempt at domination and control was the desperate maneuver of someone who understood, on a level below their conscious awareness, that if you ever fully came into yourself, their leverage was finished. They were never targeting your weakness. They were always targeting your power. Now let's name what narcissistic tactics actually are when you strip the sophistication away. Cowardice, not the ordinary variety, a specific, elaborate, industrialized cowardice, dressed in aggression, wrapped in charm, distributed through proxies, and executed from a safe distance, so the architect never has to stand in the direct consequence of what they've engineered. Think about the mechanics of every tool in their arsenal. Gaslighting is the coward's alternative to accountability. Rather than standing in the truth of what they did, they dismantle your ability to perceive truth at all. They attack the instrument instead of addressing the finding. Flying monkeys are the coward's military. They never fight their own battles directly when they can recruit someone else to absorb the exposure and the blowback while they observe from a distance and adjust strategy. Smear campaigns are the coward's preemptive strike, launched not after conflict but in anticipation of being seen clearly. They construct the narrative before you can tell your truth because they know, if your truth lands uncontested, it dismantles the entire fiction they've built. Silent treatment is the coward's weapon of last resort. When they cannot win the argument, cannot rewrite the reality, cannot recruit effectively, they withdraw into silence and weaponize your need for resolution against you. Every single one of these tactics shares a common architecture. The narcissist never has to be present for the damage. They never have to be exposed. They never have to be accountable. They engineer harm from behind glass and call it strength. In Kemetic tradition, this is the antithesis of the warrior principle. The true warrior stands in ma'at, in truth, in clarity, in direct confrontation with reality. The narcissist's tactics are not the moves of a warrior. They are the moves of someone who knows they cannot survive a fair fight. Now let's talk about the financial reality of what they've been running, because this is where it becomes genuinely staggering. Every narcissistic campaign against a chosen one is a leveraged investment with catastrophic fundamentals. The capital they spent, emotional bandwidth they didn't have, relational credibility they borrowed from people who trusted them, spiritual currency accumulated across lifetimes, burned through in a single cycle of petty domination, time, energy, attention, and the loyalty of every proxy they recruited and eventually burned through in service of the operation. The return they projected, your collapse, your permanent destabilization, your retreat from your own power, your dependence on their narrative, your continued availability as supply. The return they actually received, frustration, not partial frustration, not temporary frustration, compounding, escalating, systemic frustration, because the asset they invested against kept appreciating. Every attack made you more discerning. Every manipulation made you more literate. Every attempt at domination activated a deeper layer of sovereignty that wouldn't have awakened without the pressure. They funded your upgrade. In Hermetic law, the principle of correspondence states as above, so below, as within, so without. Their internal bankruptcy, the hollowness, the absence of genuine self, the void where authentic identity should live, manifested externally as a campaign that was always going to produce diminishing returns. You cannot invest from emptiness and expect abundance. The math was never going to work. They took out a spiritual loan they had no capacity to repay, against a soul they fundamentally could not afford. And here is where, if your healing is far enough along, you have to take a moment to appreciate just how cosmically absurd the ledger looks. They deployed the full arsenal: love bombing, expensive; gaslighting infrastructure, exhausting to maintain; flying monkey recruitment and management, a part-time job; smear campaign content creation and distribution, ongoing overhead; surveillance operation, time-consuming; Hoover attempts, emotionally costly even for someone without fully functioning emotions. Grand total investment: everything they had, and a considerable amount they didn't. Return on investment: you got therapy, got clear, got healed, got sovereign, got thriving, and they got a frustration so deep it is now manifesting as physical depletion, relational chaos, and the dawning cosmic horror that the supply they destroyed themselves to recover is simply not coming back. They went broke, trying to bankrupt someone who had already discovered an internal treasury they couldn't touch. And the audacity, the absolute audacity, of continuing to run operations on an empty account while the quarterly results keep coming back as zero. That is not strategy anymore. That is just stubbornness in a trench coat pretending to be power. Let's close this out with the truth that their entire campaign, unintentionally, ironically, expensively, confirmed. You were always the threat they said you weren't. When they told everyone you were unstable, they were describing the earthquake they felt in their own foundation when you got close to clarity. When they told everyone you were too much, they were confessing that what you carried exceeded their capacity to contain or control. When they invested this much into your diminishment, they were issuing an inadvertent appraisal of your worth. Because you do not run a multi-year campaign against something insignificant. You do not deploy this many resources against someone who poses no threat to your operation. The size of the attack has always been proportional to the size of the light. In Gnostic tradition, the archonic forces do not pursue what is ordinary. They pursue what carries genuine divine intelligence, what carries sovereign frequency, what has the potential to awaken others and disrupt the architecture of deception. They came for you, specifically, strategically, repeatedly. That is not evidence of your weakness. That is a spiritual background check, and you passed every level. They spent everything they had, trying to take everything you had. You're still here, still building, still sovereign, and they're sitting with the bill. If you have watched a narcissist go completely broke, spiritually, energetically, relationally, running a campaign against someone who was just becoming more powerful by the day, drop bankrupt in the comments. The bully was always broke. They just hid the balance sheet. They went completely broke trying to bankrupt someone who had just discovered an internal treasury they couldn't touch. The math was never going to work. Be sure to like, share, and follow your tribe of alchemists.